folks, so it's another belated one. This will probably be coming out on Wednesday night, Thursday morning, but I've had a very busy week, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what happened at the weekend, and it pertains to me trying out flash photography for the first time. Now, what I was doing at the weekend was some model shoots. I've joined a sort of a group of photographers and models, and they have meets once a month where they'll go to a location and everyone collaborates to get some practice in taking pictures and modelling. And I think I worked with about 5 models overall, and I'm going to feature a couple of pictures that I took tonight for one of the models. And I will copy her social media details in the pictures that I share, so please do go and give her a follow as well, but that will be revealed in good time. But I wanted to go over a technique. So I've generally been a natural light shooter. I've always worked with natural light. I've not used light modifiers a lot. I mean, I've used light modifiers more in video, because I like working with static light, because it's kind of like you can see in real time what you get, but you can't with a flash, because a flash is a moment in time, and you've got to get the setting right. But it was an ideal opportunity to try, and I took along, and you've probably seen I've got you see them in the reflections, but I use 2 umbrellas to light me up here when I film at night. But you can also use these umbrellas with the flash behind them, and the umbrella diffuses the light. And I also thought if you used a flash directly, or with its little small diffuser, that it would be a bit too harsh. But then I'd never done a model shoot in front of a waterfall before, and I wanted to try and get the water smooth, which is long exposure, and the model sharp. And you can do that with flash. Now, one of the things, I spoke to one of the photographers initially who said, just use your flash on your camera. And I'd read a little bit about it. And although I wanted to shoot at a lower shutter speed, I found that what worked for me at the time, and you can go lower, was 1/30th of a second on the shutter speed. And you're able to, therefore, in 1/30th of a second, the waterfall will be blurry, because obviously the water moves a lot in that time the shutter's open. But the flash has the action of freezing the motion. So today on my lunch break, I went out to a little beck that's sort of behind where I work. And in between the heavy rain showers, I took 3 pictures. I took a picture of these leaves without the flash, which I'll bring up now. And you can see that it was taken at 1/30th of a second. I was quite stable with the camera, although it was handheld. I had IBIS on, and I was able to rest on a railing, so there was no camera movement. I did want to set a tripod up, but the weather was very windy, and it was likely that the camera would have moved more on the tripod, so I decided to do it handheld at 1/30th. And there'll be more behind that, because I did all my model pictures handheld as well. And the pictures come out okay. The IBIS has done its job, but the wind was quite strong. It was a gusty wind, and it was blowing the flowers around. And you can see that at 1/30th of a second, we've been able to get the leaves relatively sharp, but there's some motion blur, which is what you'd expect at 1/30th of a second. Now, if we sped the shutter up to get rid of the motion blur, we would lose the effect of the water. The faster the picture, the shutter fires, the more frozen the water looks. And you're not after that look, you're after a smooth look where the water goes milky. So we do that with flash. So I was shooting with what's called TTL flash. So I only have a little baby flash. It's not a very powerful flash, and it only has a short range. And I'm fascinated by what I've learned with lighting, to the point where I really would like to buy some better lighting equipment for future model shoots. But that's maybe another story behind that. So if you want to shoot something that's moving, whether it be your pet, a flower, or a person, a friend, a model, how can you do it at a low shutter speed to get maybe the trees behind all blurry and sort of serene? So I'm not talking about blurry as in shallow depth of field, because I was shooting at f5.6 or even f8 sometimes at the weekend when I was doing the model shoots. The reason being, I wanted the waterfall to be, to a certain extent, discernible. You know, because one thing we do with portraits is we go, oh, I've got a 56mm f1.2. I'm going to absolutely obliterate the background by shooting at f1.2. But then you find that one of the model's eyes in focus and the other one isn't, because the depth of field so razor thin. Anyway, I digress. So I shot with what's called front curtain flash. Now I later learned that it's not as effective as shooting with rear curtain flash. And you're going to be, what the hell is front curtain flash and rear curtain flash? I'm sure some of you'll know, but for those of you who don't, there's two different modes of the flash. And if you think about the shutter, if I'm getting this right, the shutter comes across, or if you like, down the when it fires the sensor. It doesn't just like close it and open it. There's like a sort of moment where the front part of the shutter hits the sensor and then exits. So you can time when the flash fires, and this is so you can do a long exposure. And I'm explaining this in very layperson's terms, because as somebody who shoots natural light, front and rear curtain didn't really mean a lot to me. So what front curtain does is effectively it fires as the shutter opens for the long exposure. So that means that the subject is illuminated with the flash, which can make that sharp, but if the subject subsequently moves, there might be some very strange looking behaviour. You'll get like a ghosting effect, but it won't look blurry. You'll have like a sharp image overlaid with a ghostly image. And it's really interesting how we do it. If you actually did a picture of a car with front curtain shutter to get a long exposure of the taillights, they'd kind of trail ahead of the car. It's really weird. Now, I took a picture today with front curtain shutter, and you can see that it's actually pretty sharp in some areas, but you can see that where there's been movement, where the wind was blowing the leaves, there's actually a lot of this ghostly blur. You can sort of see a subtle sharpness to the image there, but there's like not motion blur, but, well, it is motion blur, but it's kind of like a ghostly motion blur. And it's quite an artistic effect. And this is the thing about shooting with flash like this, is you can create quite an artistic effect just by having a play with it and shooting at a lower shutter speed than you normally would. So I was quite lucky. My camera has very good IBIS, and we had some superb models who were so good with that they would change their pose, but they would hold that pose so solidly and they wouldn't move. And I think that contributed towards why I got the pictures sharp as well, is that, you know, we just had such fantastic people modelling for us as well. I think it all helps go towards getting a good picture, and I was so pleased with the pictures that came out. As I say, more on that shortly. So we've looked at the front curtain picture, and we've looked at what it's like without. So I wanted to get an example of rear curtain. And again, we had it wasn't perfect conditions. It was very difficult to shoot today because of the wind. But I thought, well, if it's moving, let's see what it can do. And this is the picture of me doing rear curtain shutter. This is where, now rear curtain is just as the shutter is about to close on the exposure, if you like, and the exposure's over, the flash fires. So that means that there's no movement to record on the exposure because the flash is just illuminating it. So you might sometimes get a trail, but it's not as pronounced. And what it can do is it can really, you can use like a really low shutter speed and get the image quite sharp. And you'll see as I brought this image up that it's actually the same conditions, windy, the leaves are moving, but they're sharp for the most part. I mean, it was moving quite rapidly and there are parts that aren't sharp, but you can see around the stem and also around some of the lower leaves that were flapping around. They're literally frozen in time. And you can get, depending on whether you've got a model twirling light or, they've got light backlit shining through some cloth that they're wearing, that they're whirling around or something like that to get an effect. You can get some very interesting effects. Equally, if there's something behind the model, like a waterfall, you can blur the waterfall, but keep the model sharp because the model's not going to be moving much at all. They're going to be pretty stationary. And that flash at the end will freeze them. Whereas the flash at the start will still freeze them, but if there's any slight movement, it'll be picked up like ghosting. But again, if you did a long, you could do things like a long exposure. I saw one example where somebody did a few second exposure and then they took a picture. I'll have to try this because I could technically do it myself. And then they moved position as the camera shutter was open and positioned themselves opposite where they started. So, imagine my hand turning like that. And it created a ghostly figure on one, and it was them, sharp as anything with the flash, looking at a ghostly image of themselves from where they were, which is kind of like the trail. And that's like because the flash fired at the end of the exposure, whereas you would effectively, at the other end, you would get, the ghosting will be in reverse. If you did front curtain shutter, the flash would fire at the start, and then you get a ghostly trail off the person, almost as if somebody was sucking their spirit out. So what you could do with that is you could do the reverse. You could do somebody standing going, as if they're getting their sort of spirit sucked out of them. And as they move, the flash fires first, and then you get this trail of this ghostly image being drawn out of them. And you can get some really interesting effects. So that's kind of what I've learned. And I'm by no means an expert in this, and I'm not professing to be. All I wanted to share with you was what I'd learned today. Well, not today, what I'd learned at the weekend when I did this shoot, and what a wonderful experience it was. And I've shied away from using flash for many years. And with a little bit with some guidance by some of the models and some of the photographers there that were more experienced than me, I was gobsmacked by the results. And here's some of the pictures now of Helen. And she was one of the models. And she had some wonderfully striking poses of sort of forming herself around the rocks. And I was not just blown away by, how skilled she was as a model, but the result of what I was able to capture and sort of the emotion that came out of the picture, like sort of took my breath away to an extent. And I was really pleased with, I'm just bringing a few of these shots up now as I'm talking, really pleased with a couple of these shots that came out. And I'm not saying, I'm the best photographer in the world, far from it, but I really surprised myself because I didn't think I could do this. I've done a few model shoots in the past, but model photography, I've done street photography, you see, so I like reportage, and I don't know if you can see that coming through in the way I shoot, and I think I've got a lot to learn, but I think I surprised myself. But hey, this is something for you to discuss in the comments as well, of what do you think? Do you think you would try this? Have you ever tried flash photography? Is there anything that worries you about flash photography? I'd be interested to know. And I'd be interested to know if there's any experienced people here would have any further advice for me, because I know people on YouTube, people come to be taught how to do things, but sometimes you have to be humble, and I'm not necessarily teaching you how to do something today. I'm more sharing experience of what I learned from people who were teachers to me at the weekend, because by far and away I felt like a noob. There was people there with much bigger flashes than my tiny little flash, and I'm running around with my little tiny camera, my little Fuji, and my little tiny Godox flash. I do have one of these, and I'll talk about this in a minute, because I wanted to talk a little bit about what I was recommended. So off-camera flash is obviously easier, and the idea would be to get something called a Godox 8200, which I have read about. Basically, it's a big flash, but it's very controllable, and you can do a lot more than you can with a little tiddly flash like this. But to control one, you need a remote trigger, which I do have. So I got this some time ago. I got this about 4 years ago with the intent of these two items. I got them with the intent of doing some flash photography, and I just never did it. And this weekend just took my breath away, both from the experience, the wonderful people I met, and doubting myself, and then removing that self-doubt when I was surprised that even though I'd still made mistakes, and there's a lot of room for improvement, I was still dead pleased and chuffed with the results that came out. And I'm looking forward to doing it again. So it's more of an experience, share that, but something for you to try if you've got a flash. You'll need a TTL flash. You can do it in manual. You can do it with a manual flash if you control the power of the flash manually. So there's two types of way you can use a flash, actually. I'll very quickly go over it. And now, again, layperson's terms, because I only just learned this myself. TTL is through the lens. And basically, just like you can have exposure compensation for your camera to, when it's in semi-automatic mode, to tell it to over or underexpose an image, you can do that with your flash. So if I fire my flash at the model and the camera's in fully manual, but I think the flash is too bright, I can say, oh, I want to 1 EV darker. So I just dial the flash down. Now, you can switch the flash to manual mode and then just set it to power. I think it starts at, full power, then it'll be, is it 75%? So it'll be 3/4, half, quarter, 1/8, 16th. So you get the idea, it halves every time. But I found that I was getting on okay with TTL and, semi-automatic. Don't be afraid to let the camera do a bit of the work for you, because the results were actually pretty good. But some areas that where my flash struggled was it didn't have the range, and if I was a little bit distant from the model, there was a bit of grain crept in, and it wasn't quite as sharp as I would have liked, and that's just because the flash that I've got is a very, very weak flash, because it's ultra portable, but it still did remarkably well. So there you go, a little bit of what I've learned about flash photography. Let me know if you've done flash photography or if it confuses you. And I might do I think I will in the future do some more things on flash photography. And I definitely want to get a hold of one of the AD200s to get some better lighting and finally challenge my demons of flash photography. And I hope you enjoyed the images. And please do give Helen a follow. And I've got links in the description below as well, if you want to go via the links also. Thanks for that, folks, and I will catch you all later. Bye.